Hello, everyone. This is John Doyle from Optics EQ. I'm going to talk about the Derby. In particular, I'm going to look at the past results or OptixPLOT results of the Derbies between the years 2008 and 2016. Hopefully, that'll help us give an indication and shed some light on this year's Derby. I first of all want to thank the folks at Brisnet.com for providing us with the data. They're our news sourcing partner May 1st and going forward. Lots of good things, hopefully, in the future. More on that later, but just want to thank those folks. As I was going through the data, the first thing that kind of popped out at me, and this is anyone who's used OptixPLOT, this doesn't is going to be any surprise. Quadrant 1 runners are the most viable win contenders. Just think of it, too. When we think about Quadrant 1, we're thinking about horses that put themselves in the race early, and if they have any kind of finishability, and the exception is large circles. I'm sorry, large circles. That what the large circle indicates is a horse has a weak late pace in its past performances relative to the other horses. So especially when you think about 10 furlongs and a mile and a quarter, horses coming into that race with large circles are usually indication that they're probably not going to get the distance. So, but Quadrant 1 has produced the winner of the Derby 6 of the last 9, and in particular the last 5 years in a row. So, and again, they do have the same number of starts as Quadrant 4. So just to show you that it's not completely skewed in terms of Quadrant 1 having all the runners, that's why they have the winners. It's split pretty evenly between Quadrants 1 and Quadrant 4. There are exceptions, and it does happen. In 2008, Mind That Bird was kind of a bit of a crazy race, and he was on the border between Quadrants 1 and 3. And you'll see American Pharoah when I show you the plot results. I mean, he really, for all intents and purposes, looks like he's in Quadrant 1. He's just a huge square on the border of Quadrant 1 and 3. And then Orb in 2013 was more of a set of circumstances. He was in the right-hand side. He was kind of close to Quadrant 1, 2, and 4. And that race was the Palace Malice race, and was kind of a meltdown, and we'll show you that too. So let's look first of all at last year to just kind of prove our point about Quadrant 1. Quadrant 1 dominated the Derby in 2016. You see all top 4 finishes, and they're noted by those color coding, right? So you got green, red, yellow, and blue. And the top 4 finishes all were in Quadrant 1. So Nyquist, Exaggerated Gunrunner, and Mohayem were all in Quadrant 1. You can see Quadrant 2 and 3 had very sparse runners, but Quadrant 4 was pretty loaded and just got blanked in 2016. This was the 2015, and I was talking about American Pharoah being on the board. You can see he's a huge square, so great late pace. That's how kind of the race was run. He sat off firing line in Dortmund and kind of kicked home. Again, he was an exception, but you could really make the case he was in Quadrant 1 also. 2013, this was the crazy race. It was on and off track, and you can see I got the fractions up there that were just blistering. That's when Palace Malice kind of tried to run the field off their feet. That was a race that the really good miler, Golden Sense sprinter miler, was in the race. But if you think the Derby is going to melt down, you want to be looking at Quadrants 2 and 4. You can see all top 4 finishes came from there, and those are horses coming from off the pace. And you can see they're all squares too, by the way. So let's talk a little bit about the late pace. Late pace is the key to the Derby. Obviously, horses trying a mile and a quarter for the first time. You want a horse that can finish. That doesn't necessarily mean he's a deep closer. I'm just saying, relative to the other horses, this horse has some finishability, and it's so clear on the plots because they're denoted by being a square versus a circle. And the bigger the square, the better the late pace. And squares are more than twice as likely, based on analysis, to finish in the top 4 than circles. So that's a key point. Between 2013 and 2016, every Derby winner was a square. The past 5 years, squares have captured 15 of the top 20 spots. So they were in the Super. They were 15 times in the Super versus only 5 for circles. And the exceptions are the circles. They were all small circles in Quadrant 1. So they're all horses that had early pace, put themselves in the race, and kind of hung around. So just so you know, the data in that period, the total number of squares and circles were relatively close, so it wasn't like it was skewed to squares. There was 48 squares and 45 circles, so pretty equal. So it just shows you the dominance of the square, and especially in a race like this. We find this mostly in plot, but in a race like the Derby where they're all trying a mile and a quarter for the first time, it's imperative. One interesting thing that we note in our analysis, Quadrant 4 squares have not won though, but they do very well in finishing out the exacta. So Quadrant 4, you might want to be looking for those horses more from an underneath perspective. Quadrant 4 squares, obviously. We'll talk about Quadrant 4 circles, but Quadrant 4 squares, can kind of clunk up and complete some of the exotics and so forth. And they've done very well in the place perspective. So here's some examples of the dominance of squares. You can just see there. This was 2012, but I'll have another. And Bodemeister, who completed exacta both squares in Quadrant 1. The Orb one we talked about. California Chrome was a square, a dominating square in Quadrant 1. That year, again, all 4 horses were squares. And you see that's the Quadrant 4 commanding curve, clunking up for the place in that race. Talked about American Pharaoh and last year, Nyquist. So you can see the last 5 years, it's been all squares. So you want to be looking at that. So when you start approaching 2017 and looking at the plot, you want to keep that in mind. Let's talk a little bit about circles. So circles not in the upper Quadrant 1, Quadrant 2 area are compromised. In fact, if they're not circles that are not in the upper Quadrant 1, Quadrant 2, 4 are compromised. So Quadrant 3 and 4 circles have only hit the top 4 of the superfecta once, and that was Mind That Bird, and that was a little bit of a crazy track and race. And again, he was close to Quadrant 1. Okay, so keep that in mind. Quadrant 2 circles only hit the top 4 spots 2 times, and I'll show you that both those horses were way up in the on the y-axis, indicating that they had some early pace, at least second call pace. So they were Pradio Prada and Tail of Acadi. And Pradio Prada, he's more of a turf horse anyway, so I don't know if we even had a right read on him. Q1 circles can win, so keep that in mind. Small circle on Big Brown. Animal Kingdom was the biggest circle to win, but he was a little bit jaded because he had no dirt form, so it wasn't probably a very accurate plot in the case of Animal Kingdom. Super Saver and Mind That Bird, both were off tracks and just kind of crazy days, but let's look at some of these, get a feel for it. I think visualizing this helps. So this is the Big Brown race in 2008. You can see he's a very small circle up in Quadrant 1, and you see Tail of Acadi way up on Quadrant 2. So, he had some early pace or second call pace. And then the other 2 horses were squares down in Quadrants 3 and 4. So, a circle can win, if you get the right. And he was the small circle in Quadrant 1. And again, Quadrant 1, where horses can put themselves at a race, are probably the most viable winners we talked. 2011, you see number 16 was Animal Kingdom. He's the green. He had no dirt form. So, he really, typically I would look at an Animal Kingdom and think he'd be more of a square, just kind of the way he runs and his run style. So I don't know if this was really a fair plot. It was kind of more, again, an exception than the rule. And again, you see the Quadrant 4 horse, the number, I think it was 16, Nero, got up for the place, and he was a Quadrant 4 square. So, those we looked at Mind That Bird and Super Saver, again, he was in Quadrant 1 square. So, just so you can win and you can hit the board, but again, you're going to want to be in Quadrants 1, particularly for the win, or Quadrants 1 and 2 for, underneath. Quadrants 3 and 4 are really up against it. So, in review, let's think about 2017 and think about how we project the Derby. You want to be looking at Quadrant 1 runners as viable win candidates. Again, the exception is the large circle. So if you're seeing horses with really large circles in Quadrant 1 or anywhere for that matter, obviously, you want to kind of downgrade those horses. And again, downgrade circles not in quadrants 1 and 2. Those are any kinds of circles. So if you get even small circles in quadrants 3 and 4, those horses up against it because they're going to have to outkick horses, and they haven't shown that in their past performances relative to the other horses in the race. Late pace is the key, so upgrade squares. We know that. And Q4 or quadrant 4 squares are the best, seem to be in the underneath slots. So if you want more about understanding of the plot, go to our website. We'll have a Derby package for $50. It's going to be the whole weekend, the plot you get for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, for all the tracks we cover, especially the Oaks and the Derby. We're going to have a race by horse analysis for the Oaks and Derby, and we're going to bring some of this plot stuff in there. Again, pace handicapping is just one leg in the stool of handicapping, but it's an important one. And what we think we've done here at Optix is try to simplify it for people, so that you don't have to do a lot of work in the visualizations there, but you still have to do the work, but at least we take some of the drudgery out of it. So that's it for the Derby, for past Derbies. Good luck, and thanks for listening.